I've watched enough of life to understand this. The people who change us don't arrive with fanfare. They come quiet through a letter, a handshake, a door we weren't sure we wanted to open. The ones who stay aren't the ones who promise the most. They showed up when it counted. This story is about a man who believed he needed no one. The stagecoach was 3 hours late. Silas Cade stood outside the station at Copper Creek, back against a wooden post, watching the empty road. His fingers had worn the photograph soft, the woman's face fading to gray. Wind cut through his coat. October in Montana meant winter was close inside the station. Laughter, the smell of tobacco. He didn't go in. Then dust on the horizon. The groan of wheels. His hand closed around the photograph. The coach to me. The door swung open. A woman stepped down. One battered Val mud on her hem. Eyes that found him and held. She didn't smile. Neither did he. If this story finds you tonight, I'd love to know where you're listening from. And if you've enjoyed these tales without subscribing, I hope you'll consider it. It means more than you know. 2 hours on the trail. Clarara's thighs ached from gripping the horse's flanks, her arms stiff from holding the candle behind Silas without touching him. The wind carried pine and coming snow. He hadn't spoken since the station. The cabin appeared as the sun dropped behind the ridge-weathered logs. Smoke blackened kimchi, one window catching the last orange light. No garden, no curtains, no sign a woman had ever set foot here. Silas swung down, tied the horse, lifted her valves without looking at her. She followed him inside. The door scraped against the floor. One room, a cast-iron stove squatting cold in the corner, a table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with tins and jars. Everything arranged with a precision that felt less like order and more like defense. Your room's through there. He pointed to a narrow door. I sleep in the loft. Clara nodded. Her fingers found the clasp of her valise. You handle the cooking in the house. I handle everything outside. He was already crouching by the stove, feeding kindling into the belly. We don't need to talk about what came before either of us. The fire caught. Light crawled up the walls. She opened her valve and pulled out the tablecloth. White linen embroidered with yellow daisies, edges frayed from years of washing. Her mother's hands had stitched those flowers. She spread it across the rough pine table. Silas stood. His eyes moved to the cloth. Something shifted in his jaw, a muscle tightening, releasing. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. Supper was beans and hard bread. They ate facing each other. The tablecloth between them like a question, and neither knew how to ask. When he finished, he stood, rinsed his plate in the bucket by the door, and climbed the ladder to the loft without a word. Clara sat alone. The fire popped, wind pressed against the window glass. Later, in her narrow bed, she pulled out paper and ink from her valve. The letter to her sister in Ohio came easy, her handwriting even. Each letter formed with the care of someone trained to precision. From the loft above, she heard him shift, then stop. She kept writing. She didn't know he was watching through the peg up in the floorboards, studying her hand as it moved across the page, steady, practiced. Too perfect for a simple widow. 2 weeks passed in a rhythm Clara learned without being taught. She rose before dawn when frost covered the inside of the window glass, dressed quickly in the cold wool stockings first, then the heavy skirt, then the shawl wrapped twice around her shoulders. The stove was always her first task, kindling smaller logs, the bigger pieces once the fire caught. By the time Silas climbed down from the loft, the cabin was warming and coffee was ready. He never said thank you. But he never left without drinking a full cup. She learned other things, too. The way he hung his coat on the same peg every night, the left one, never the right. The way he checked the door latch twice before sitting down to eat. The way his hands moved when he wasn't thinking. Always reaching for something to do, to fix, to hold. She learned when to speak and when to stay quiet, mostly quiet. The days took on a shape. He went out before full light and came back when the sun touched the ridge. She cooked clean, mended, kept the fire burning. They ate together at the table with her mother's tablecloth spread between them, and the silence was heavy, but not hostile. Small things. She noticed small things. He never started eating until she sat down. She'd tested it once, staying at the stove longer than necessary, stirring the pot that didn't need stirring. He'd waited, fork in hand, plate full, waiting. When she finally sat, he picked up his fork and ate without comment. She didn't mention it. The first real snow came in early November. Clara watched it through the window all morning, thick flakes falling steady, covering the ground, the wood pile, the path to the outhouse. By noon, the world had turned white. By mid-afternoon, the wind picked up and the flakes came sideways, hard as sand. Silas had left at dawn to check the fence line. That was 8 hours ago. She kept the fire burning, swept the floor that didn't need sweeping, mended a tear in her spare dress, the calico one she'd brought from Ohio, ground coffee beans in the handmill, the crank squeaking with each turn. The light failed early. She lit the oil lamp, reheated the water, let it cool, reheated it again. The clock on the shelf, a small brass thing she'd found in a drawer, and wound without asking, showed 5 o'clock, then 6, then half past. The wind screamed against the walls. Clara stood at the window, but there was nothing to see, just white. The snow coming so thick it erased everything beyond the porch. She thought about the trail, the way it narrowed near the ridge, where rocks jutted out, and a man could lose his footing if he couldn't see. She thought about the cold, how it could take a body down in pieces, fingers first, then feet, then thoughts going slow and strange. She put another log on the fire, reheated the water a third time. At 7, the door opened. Silas came in on a gust of wind and snow, his shoulders white with it, his beard crusted with ice. He stood in the doorway, breathing hard, then pushed the door shut against the storm. Clara's hands pressed flat against her apron. He pulled off his gloves. His fingers were red, stiff. He looked at the stove at the kettle, still sitting there, steam rising from the spout. "You didn't have to wait up. I wasn't waiting." Her voice came out steadier than expected. "Just not sleepy." He crossed to the stove. She saw it then in the slight hitch in his step. The way his right shoulder dropped lower than the left. He was hurting. Had been hurting maybe for longer than tonight. She poured hot water into a tin cup. Added the coffee she'd ground that afternoon. Held it out. He took it. His fingers brushed hers and both of them went still. The cup was warm. She'd kept it warm 3 times now. Silas looked at her. Really looked for the first time since the station. His eyes were dark, unreadable. But something in them shifted, a crack in the surface, thin as a hair. He drank long and slow, letting the heat work into him. "Coffee's good," he said. "It's been on the stove a while." "I know." The wind howled outside. Inside, the fire crackled, and he sat down at the table. She brought the stew she'd kept warm, ladled it into a bowl, set it in front of him, made her own plate, and sat across. The tablecloth spread between them like it had been every night. They ate in silence, but it was different now. The quiet had edges before, sharp ones. Tonight, it felt more like breathing room. When he finished, Silas didn't stand right away. He sat there, turning the empty cup in his hands, watching the fire through the stove's small window. "Tomorrow," he said, "I'll bring more wood in. Stack it by the door so you don't have to go out to the shed." Clara looked up. "You don't have to." "I know." Another silence. But this one held something. He stood, rinsed his cup and bowl, set them on the shelf, then paused at the foot of the ladder. "Coffee," he said, not quite looking at her. "In the morning, you'll make some." "I always do." "I know." He put his hand on the ladder rung. I'll wait for it before I go out." She nodded. Didn't trust her voice. He climbed. The loft creaked as he settled. Clara sat alone at the table. The fire burning low. She should go to bed. Should stop reading meaning into small things. Coffee. Wood by the door. A man saying he'd wait. But she didn't move. Not yet. Outside. The storm raged inside. Something had shifted that night. She woke to a sound from the loft. Not footsteps, not the creak of boards, something else. A voice low, broken. Speaking, a name. Clara lay still in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. The voice came again ragged, raw. The sound of a man caught in a dream he couldn't escape. Eliza. The name hung in the dark. A woman's name spoken like a womb torn open. Then silence. The wind. The settling of logs in the stove. Clara didn't move, didn't breathe. She lay there until the gray light of dawn crept through the window. Thinking about that name, about the empty cabin when she'd arrived, the precision of everything in its place, the way he'd looked at her mother's tablecloth that first night like he'd seen a ghost. In the morning, she didn't ask. She rose before dawn, same as always, built the fire, ground the coffee, let 2 cups on the table. When Silas came down, his face was drawn, his eyes hollow. He sat without speaking. Clara poured his coffee, then poured a second cup and set it beside his plate. He looked at it, looked at her. "Figured you might want extra this morning," she said. "Cold night." Something moved behind his eyes. Not suspicion, something else. He wrapped both hands around the first cup and drank. Neither of them mentioned the name. But that evening when Clara went to the woodshed, she found the heavy logs had been moved, restacked. The biggest ones now sat at chest height, easy to grab without bending, without straining. She stood there in the cold, her breath pluming white, and stared at the neat rows. He hadn't said anything, hadn't asked if she needed help. He'd just done it. She carried an armload of wood back to the cabin, her mind turning, the stacking, the coffee, the way he waited for her to sit before he ate. Small things, things a person did without thinking, or things a person did because they were thinking too much and didn't know how to say it. That night after supper, Clara pulled out her paper and ink. The letter to her sister was half finished, sitting in the drawer for a week now. She wrote by lamplight, her hand moving in those same even strokes precise, practiced the penmanship of someone trained to documents and legal filings, from the loft. No sound, but she could feel him up there, awake, listening. She wondered how much he'd seen, how much he'd guessed. And she wondered, for the first time, if maybe she wasn't the only one in this cabin keeping secrets. November settled into the mountains like something that meant to stay. Clara learned to read the weather now, the way clouds masked along the ridge before storm, the particular quality of light that meant snow by nightfall. She learned to read other things, too, things that didn't announce themselves. Silas moved differently on cold mornings. She noticed at first at breakfast, the way he reached for his coffee with his left hand instead of his right, then at the door, the slight hesitation before he pulled on his coat, his jaw tightening as he worked his arm through the sleeve.